Andrew here from ASIC Basics. Today, as you can see, my faux wall, we're going to work on some wiring. What I've got set up today to walk us through, we're going to wire up a single 120 volt outlet, 20 amp, and we're going to wire up two 240 volt outlets, 20 amp, and they're going to be in parallel. Reason for using the yellow wire, yellow Romex, is so you know this is 12 gauge. It's pretty much an industry standard. White, if you see in your house, it's 14 gauge, can handle up to 15 amp. Yellow is 12 gauge, can handle up to 20 amps, and sometimes you'll see orange, which is a 10 gauge. It can generally go up to 30 amps. Now we can talk about temperatures and ampacity and whether it's copper or aluminum, but the generic standard is the white 14, 50 amps, yellow 12 gauge, 20 amps, and orange is 10 gauge, 30 amps. First step, if you're putting in new outlets, definitely consult an electrician. Don't go about it on your own if you're not comfortable. There are certain things you've got to start worrying about when you're wiring in to make sure things are up to code. For example, if this were the bottom plate down here, we want to have the top of the outlet. Can't be any closer than 16 inches to the floor. I've actually opted to go all the way up to 36. Generally, that's where it's going to be on a rack, so it's easier to access. Also, you can see I've got the cabling stapled in. You have to have it stapled within 8 inches of a box or where it goes through a wall. Once again, these are just those things that you need to know about. If you're going to do any wiring, it's got to be inspected. And I strongly encourage, if you haven't done it before, get with an electrician, definitely get with your inspector. Just make sure anything that you do is 100% up to code. So today we're going to focus on what we've got here, which is a 20 amp, 125 volt socket. That's going to be here, an individual socket. We're also going to do two 250 volt, 20 amp sockets, receptacles. We're going to do those in parallel. A lot of times, a lot of the newer miners, you're using up 4,000 watts. So generally, a lot of the power cords, we don't want to handle it on one. We actually have a dual core power supply. So it's easier just to put two outlets in. We split the load. We always have 20 amps running to here. So no matter what, we can split it 10 amps each. The most important thing is don't overload it. So don't put this in here and then start drawing 10 amps on this and 10 amps on this. Once again, most miners won't draw enough power off a 20 amp line, but once again, I've written other articles and talked about that before. You have to make sure you plan your circuits out before you get into it. But this is a pretty basic circuit we're going to work on. It's something I've wired in for L7s, S19s, very common for those that take 3,000 to 4,000 watts.
Another thing to note, before we get started, we definitely want to make sure we got the right tools for the job. Your basic electrical wiring, you're going to need some needle nose pliers, a pair of lineman pliers, your wire strippers, some extra cable that you're going to use for your pigtails, obviously your outlets, your wire nuts, and then you're going to want to have a good drill and drill driver with about a 1/2 inch bit so you can be boring through 1 or 2 studs, however many you need to get through in order to get your wiring done. Also going to want to have a lineman's hammer for hammering in staples. You'll see later on there's specific code for how often you have to secure the cable. Also, it helps secure the receptacle boxes into the wall.
The first thing we want to make sure we do is we want to give ourselves probably 8 to 12 inches of excess after we've stapled it down. Reason being, we need some room to work, but when we're going to tuck it back in when we're done, but we don't want to have too much because we'll wind up wasting wire, having to cut it off, and it won't fit in there. So what we do is we strip sheathing off as much as we can. We'll take the paper off. That's going to expose our 3 wires. In a 120 circuit, we're going to have our hot wire. We're going to have a grounding conductor. We're going to have our neutral wire, which is actually bound to the copper wire back in the electrical box. So, after we've got everything stripped back, we want to go ahead and cut our excess cabling back, or sheathing, paper, ensure not to cut the conductor. We've got that done. Now what we need to do, take our wire strippers. We've got 12 gauge. On a lot of these, they have a wire stripping gauge for how much you need to strip back. It's pretty generic. I like to give myself a little bit more so I get a good hook in there. I'm going to go back, set it on 12, strip right off, set it on 12. Strips right off. Okay. Now what we need to do is we're going to create little hooks. We can either slide the wires directly in, or on this one, we're actually going to have to make a hook. Whenever we make a hook, what I mean is just a little twist in the wire. And that, so that it sits and goes around here. And we always want to do it in the clockwise direction. So as we twist down and tighten, it just gets in there stronger. If we do the other way, you might actually spread the wire out. We can look on the back. We've got a hot wire sign. It says hot wire, and we've got a neutral return wire. So we'll go ahead and get this tightened up, get one last look at it, and we'll go ahead and tuck her back in. Now as you see, I've got them all tightened down. It's in there pretty solid. You notice there's actually extra sockets here. Well, this is actually bussed together on both sides. And what this allows us to do, if we wanted to put multiple outlets in parallel, instead of having to create pigtails, which you'll see on the 240, I can just put another wire from here, another wire here, and I'll have to pigtail the ground, and I can just run that out to another outlet, either in the same larger box or somewhere else in the room. Okay, you can see once we get this done, we go ahead and we've got that slack, so we'll go ahead and bend the wires, line the outlet up, and then simply all we do, drill, and voila, just like that, we've got a 120, 20 amp outlet all wired up. And important to note, how do I know it's 20 amp? Two ways. I've got my L cabling, and this is the NEMA plug, that one horizontal, one vertical, which represents a 20 amp plug. Okay, when we're wiring up 220, same wiring, right? We've got our 12 gauge wire. The difference is going to be, now we've got our ground, and we actually have two hot wires. Now this is going to go to a double pole breaker. So each of these is going to carry 120 volts between ground. So essentially, same wiring, and we're going to have to wire up just like a regular outlet. The difference is going to be, because we're going to wire this in parallel, as you can see, I've got this wire running down out to the next box. This is the wire coming from the hot. So if I were to wire this straight into an outlet, unless I had an outlet that had a bus bar on it, I wouldn't be able to hook this up. So what we're going to do is we're going to create pigtails so I can wire them all together. And essentially what that is, I'm going to take my ground coming in, I'm going to take the ground on the pigtail for the outlet I have, and I'm going to take the ground going to the other outlet, and what I'm going to do with my lineman pliers is twist them all together. I've got the lineman pliers, take them, twist them together, and then cap them off. The wire nut. You'll see some people that will actually take the wires, bring them together without the lineman plier twist and just do that. Granted, that sometimes works, but these can easily pull out. They don't necessarily you can't visually see a twist in them. So I like to take the lineman pliers and definitely get that couple twists in it before I ever put a wire nut on there. We've got our neutral ready, and as you can see, we'll go ahead, actually not neutral, sorry, our one hot line, and we'll go ahead and get our second hot line done. For our last one, it's as simple as making our hooks, because this is an outlet that only has the screw terminals, not anywhere we can plug these into. We take our long nose pliers, right? like to stay consistent, so we'll go ahead and put our black cod on this side. We'll get them all wired in. All right, so we've got our two 240 volt outlets, 20 amp in parallel, and we've got our single 20 amp, 120 volt outlet wired up. So, like I say, it doesn't take that long. It's fairly simple to do. You just have to make sure you follow the code. That's extremely important to get it inspected. And then obviously when you want to run it back to your main breaker panel, you've got to make sure that you've got those breakers set properly. You're using the proper amperage breaker, and for 120 that you've got your ground and your neutral bonded, which they should already be, and your two hots are going to go directly into a 2-pole breaker. I hope you enjoyed this and found it useful, and if you got any questions, feel free to hit me up.
I hope you found this video useful. Please visit asicbasics.com. Go ahead and subscribe and follow me on YouTube, and feel free to hit me up with any questions, comments, or videos or information you'd like to see.